Help support the show by joining the Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. Also, hit that like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content. What's up, everybody? Welcome to QnA, the show where I take your questions and answer them here in video format. A lot of questions to get into. First question comes with Tyrone, who says, "Hey Q, big fan. I'm starting to trust Kenny Pickett the more I think about it. He was drafted in the AFC North and was pretty successful at a time the division was at its peak competitiveness. If we're judging success by wins and losses, he was, I would agree with that. And I would agree with the characterization of the AFC North at that time. Sat under a successful organization that won a Super Bowl, that's true, and got bad weather. Never thought I'd say this, but I would trust Kenny Pickett to be the day one starter. I also don't think hand size should be a major issue. My issue with Kenny Pickett has very little to do with hand size. It has everything to do with like his history of not reading the middle of the field or using the middle of the field, right? I think that's been the issue with Kenny Pickett, is that he has been a bit timid as a passer. And the Browns offense is one that if you are too timid as a passer, it's going to look like DTR, right? It's going to look very, very limiting. And that's my big fear with Kenny, right? Is he going to have the confidence to rip it? It's also, to an extent, my fear with Dylan Gabriel. Now, Shador and Joe Flacco, I don't have those fears. With Joe, I have interception fears. With Shador, I have how many sacks is this kid going to take, right? Like, how many times is this kid going to be tackled behind the backfield before he adjusts? And maybe he's made that adjustment, but I have. It's funny how these two are grouped into different like areas of concern for me. So with Kenny and Dylan, I think that they will be able to run the offense as long as they stay ahead of the sticks and as long as they stay in third and manageable. The question with Kenny and Dylan is like, hey, will they attack the middle of the field the way it needs to be attacked for this offense to work? That's why I have the big question marks, right? You know, because if you look at the guys who have had success, it's people who are willing to rip through the middle, right? Jacoby Brissett to an extent. But really, Joe Flacco, even to an extent, Kirk Cousins, right? You got to be able to rip through the middle of the field. That's what keeps this offense from being very predictable and easy to sit on, is being able to stretch the ball downfield and then attack the middle. And that's the big question with Kenny Pickett. You know, that doesn't really have much to do with Kenny's hand sizes. That has more to do with just, can Kenny attack the middle of the field, right? A lot of quarterbacks have that question mark. Now, to be fair, this has been a constant complaint of every quarterback who has played in Pittsburgh, so maybe the whole middle of the field thing is more of a Pittsburgh, the way they run their offense and the way they want to play thing, than a Kenny Pickett thing, and maybe we'll find that out. But yeah, that's the big thing with Kenny, right? Will he just rip it, right? We'll see that in the preseason, how willing he is to rip. How willing he is to rip during OTAs, well, not OTAs, but during training camp and joint practices, and then eventually in the games. Cheerio says, what could Harold Fanin be at the peak of his powers? I really like him. I feel like if he went to a bigger school, he would be a top 20 pick in the draft. So what do you think his ceiling is, Q? I don't think the not going to a top 20 school is what held Harold Fanin back. I think it's his height, right? Like, he's not prototypical tight end height, and he doesn't have prototypical tight end length. If he were 6'5", I don't care if he's at Bowling Green, he could play at Kent State, he could play at Akron for all anybody would care. He would have been a first round pick, right? But he's 6'3", closer to 6'2"-ish, which is a little under height for a shorter height for a tight end than the NFL prefers. I think that's why he fell to the third. I think the best he could be is a version of like Delanie Walker, right? Like what Delanie Walker was for so long for the Tennessee Titans. That could be Harold Fanin Jr. I could see that outcome happening. An undersized guy. I think DELANIE was a little bit more undersized than Harold was, but a beast with the ball in his hands, right? An underrated blocker and somebody who could stretch the field for you vertically. That's what I think the dream is for Harold Fanin Jr., or at least my dream is for him. William Zen says, if I remember correctly, you said it's not wise to pick a quarterback in every draft because young QBs need reps. Competition takes away from their reps. How much do you think we have to see from a quarterback this year to keep us from picking one in the draft next year? Here's the thing, right? It's not going to take much if the Browns end up with picks outside the top 20, right? Let's say the Jacksonville pick is out the top 20, and let's say the Browns pick is out the top 20. In that scenario, it's really not going to take much to stop the Browns from drafting a quarterback. Now, if the Browns pick in the top 5 with both picks, then it is going to take a ton to stop the Browns from drafting a quarterback. My point of bringing that up is the answer to this question is more about where the Browns sit in the draft than how good one of these quarterbacks play during the 2026 season. It's also about how good these guys in the 2026 class actually look by the time we get to the end of the college football season. Let's say Cade Klubnik or Andrew, what's his name? Mendoza? Not Andrew Mendoza, but Mendoza out there in Indiana, who's been a hot candidate, or Lenore Sellers. So say one of these guys has such a great year that it feels like Joe Burrow the year he came out. There's not a damn thing Shedeur Sanders can do to stop the Browns from drafting him, right? There's not a damn thing that Dillon Gabriel can do or Kenny Pickett. And if you're a Browns fan, you should understand and want that, right? Because if one of these prospects are generational, nothing's stopping you from taking that guy, right? My big example for this is look at how fast the Colts gave up on Peyton Manning's return to play versus just getting Andrew Luck, right? Andy Dalton was there in Cincinnati. Well, Joe Burrow pops up in the draft. Bye-bye, Andy Dalton, right? If it's one of those years and you have one of those picks, take the blessing, take the quarterback, no matter what, right? If there's a generational prospect there, take the guy, right? If there's a Drake May, Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams level prospect, and you have a pick that can get them outright, take the quarterback, right? And it's not going to matter what Shedeur does, right? Now, or Dillon Gabriel does. What you can do in that situation is then trade Shedeur if he plays well, or trade Dillon Gabriel if he plays well, or just keep Shedeur for an extra year. Understand that you have 4 years of control, 2 years left after the 2026 season. And, have Shedeur play out the first year, see what you got in the rookie. If you feel like that rookie is going to live up to the generational hype. And then in the offseason of 2026, you trade Shedeur to the highest bidder and you get a bunch of first-round picks or a bunch of picks to surround your new quarterback that you took super early in the draft with. That's kind of what this scenario is, right? I don't think the Browns are going to be in a spot to where if there's a quarterback that they love in the 2026 draft, they're not going to take them because they need to see more games out of Dillon Gabriel or Shedeur Sanders. At the end of the day, they've invested a third-round pick, a late third-round pick in Dillon Gabriel, and a fifth-round pick in Shedeur Sanders, which is to say that the investments in those players are going to be fine even if they end up being backups, right? So it's not really going to prohibit them. The thing that will prohibit the Browns from taking a quarterback is not on the roster right now. Even if Shedeur balls out, plays well, there's a scenario where the Browns say, you know what? We can't pass this up. Cam Newton's in the draft right now. We got to take him, right? Like a generational level prospect is there. The limiting factor is going to be how good are these quarterbacks in the 2026 class, What's the Browns pick? If these quarterbacks are really good and the Browns have an early pick, they're going to take a quarterback. If these quarterbacks aren't really good and the Browns have an early pick, they might not take a quarterback. If these quarterbacks aren't really good and the Browns have a late pick, then they're just going to take whoever, right? That's more of what's going to determine this, right? Shedeur or Dylan, they could have a great season, but unless those other things line up, that's going to be a possibility no matter what. You get what I'm saying? So don't think of that question that you have as a question about what do the Browns need to see out of Shedeur or Dylan to not draft the quarterback next year? It's more of a question of like, hey, how good do these guys in college need to be? Plus, where do the Browns pick needs to be in order for the Browns to take a quarterback next year? Because if they're in a position to take somebody they think can change the franchise, they're going to take that guy. The Browns will be relentless in their pursuit to get the most out of the quarterback position as possible. And if that means drafting a generational prospect with the top 5 pick, they will do that. Now the question is, will there be that prospect in next year's class? That we have no answer to, right? Hey, before the draft that ended up being the Joe Burrow draft, right? Everybody just assumed Tua was going to be the number 1 pick of that draft for like 3 years. And then Joe Burrow comes out of nowhere and ends up being a generational first-round pick, right, by the time we get to the draft. So we really got to see the college football season play out before we can make any assumption about what the Browns are going to do next year, even if we're making assumptions about what the Browns rookies at quarterback do next year. You feel me? All right. P. Bear says, is Jerome Ford more tradable after his pay cut? Can Sampson or Chubb be a third down back? Still trying to find a place for Chubb on the team. Have a good weekend. Here's the interesting thing about Dylan Sampson. He has the build in the NFL of a third down back. I think a lot of people look at him and see a third down back, but when you watch his tape in Tennessee, he doesn't play at all like a third down back. He plays like an every down guy. I'm interested to see how the Browns use him, because I could see a world where it makes a ton of sense to use Jerome Ford as that third down back, and have him be the third back too, right? Not necessarily like a full-time third down back, but split carries with Dylan Sampson and be the third back on the rotation, right? I could see a world where that happens, and that's a good role for Jerome Ford. Now, does his contract make him more tradable because he took a pay cut? That's the whole reason Jerome Ford took that pay cut, realized at the current price that he was going to get, which is like $3.5 million, he wasn't really rosterable for anybody. But after taking this pay cut, it makes him more tradable. It also makes him easier to pick up on waivers if the Browns cut him. So that was more of a preservation move for Jerome Ford to stay in the league. And given that that's the move that Jerome Ford made to stay in the league, you might be able to trade him, but it might be one of those situations where you're like, hey, we're going to cut this player. You're going to cut that player. Let's just swap him. Not necessarily like an actual trade, Mr. Tree Wizard says, which rookies do you think people are sleeping on? We hear a lot about quarterbacks, Judkins, Fanin, but I think Carson might end up being an amazing addition. I also think people are sleeping on Sampson's potential as a game breaker, and we really don't hear much about Mason Graham either, right? I think of all the rookies, like it's easy to forget that Mason Graham went 5th overall. And, we'll see. Hopefully it's not easy to forget Mason Graham once the pads come on. But I think he's probably been the most underhyped pick of all of them. If you consider where they got selected versus where the hype is, that's where Mason Graham is for sure. That being said, I wouldn't be surprised if by the time we got to the start of the season, that dynamic completely flips. Matthew says, how much of the really old stuff do you think we'll be going back to this offseason? The really old stuff. I know a lot of the changes to the offense in the last couple of years are trying to get the most out of QB, but modernizing the offense was also one of Kevin's goals. How will the Browns in the 2025 offense differ from the early Kevin Stefanski offenses of the 2000s and 2010s? It was based off of, that offense, West Coast offense, that goes all the way back to like the 1980s in Cincinnati, oddly enough, right? Like that's where it all started. Yeah, it was way, way back then, even before it got popularized with Joe Montana and Jerry Rice. I believe that whole thing started in Cincinnati. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I think the West Coast stuff, the basis of all this, goes all the way back there. So to say these are timeless concepts in football. Um, and football concepts, passing concepts, you can line them up differently, you can get into them differently, but at the end of the day, there's like a set number of passing concepts that are known to work versus different coverages, right? So it doesn't have to be spaceshipy new, right? It doesn't have to be this new passing concept that's like, it could be similar to what you have done before. It's just you have to make adjustments about how you get into it. Now, I think the biggest difference between the Browns offense in 2025 and like what the base Stefanski stuff was in 2020 is the run game. I think that's going to look a little different. Like, yes, they're going to do some similar stuff, but I think there's going to be more variety to the Browns run game, because if you ask me, that's the part of the offense that I think has aged the worst in what the Browns have done. NFL teams have really gotten on top of that wide zone, right? They have really figured out that wide zone. And I think the Browns were not quick to adapt to that. And I think they needed to add variety to the run game, which is why they changed out their offensive line coach, et cetera, and then really revamp this running room. So if you just look at all the pieces they've moved, it feels like that run game is going to be where things are the most different. Step Bro says, out of this rookie class, who do you think will have the most impact day one, and who will be the best player 7 to 8 years down the road? I would say Quincy Junkins probably going to be best player day one, because if you look at Quincy, he is ready to go, right? Running back is one of those positions where you're going to be better early in your career than you are later in it, more than likely. And then if you look at how Quincy is built and how he runs, he's already NFL sized. He has a NFL mentality at the running back position. I think day one, he's probably going to be the most impactful rookie here, right? If we're talking about 7, 8 years down the road, it's probably either going to be Mason Graham or Carson Schlesinger. Both of those players, I think, are going to be really impactful for a long time. It's just both of those players, I think, probably need to, there's being strong and then there's being NFL strong. And I think there's going to be a bit of an adjustment period for both players as they try to get to NFL strong. There'll be stuff that both those guys can do year one that will be impactful, right? I think Mason Graham's quickness will get him by early in his career. And the same thing's true with Carson Schlesinger. He has such good eyes that'll get him by early in his career. When we're talking about making that leap into being a super impactful player, then I think a little bit more size is going to be required for both of those players. Defensive tackles, no matter who you are, it's mandatory. You got to get stronger, right? No matter how strong you were at college, you got to get stronger in the NFL. And the same is true with linebackers, right? So that's why it's there. Where when you look at Quincy Junkins, it looked like he could have played in the NFL 2 years ago, right? He got one of them Leonard Fournette builds where it's like, okay, he's ready to go. That guy's been a grown man for a while. So there's no waiting for him to get more of that grown man body, where with Schlesinger, he needs to get a little bit bigger. And Mason Graham, he needs to get a little bit bigger. But, other than that, I think that all those players could be fantastic for the Browns in the future. And that's the hope, right? And if you hit on those three guys, I mean, the draft class is going to be pretty solid. Brownsternot says, what level of QB play do we need this year to be successful? We need league average quarterback play, right? If the Browns get league average quarterback play, then they have a decent chance to be successful. If they get like historically bad quarterback play, they'll suck again. Small Useless Brad says, what are you looking forward to the most in the 2025 season? Seeing some of these young players who are getting larger roles, whether it be rookies or second-year guys, fulfill those roles, and then seeing these guys grow into them, right? Is Ronnie Hickman going to become a starting safety for you? Martin Emerson, how's he going to bounce back to having a down year? Isaiah McGuire, you know, he might be the guy at the other edge position. How does he handle that responsibility? Obviously, interest in Mason Graham. How does Mike Hall step up, right? Seeing these guys who are going to be a part of the next core nucleus for this team grow. I think that's the joy of the 2025 season for me. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.